Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah.
That Effin' Sports Show, you have been riding along with us as we go through every single team, every single division. We're doing it live. We see the team, we see the matchup, we tell you who's going to win, and at the end, we figure out what the record's going to be, who's going to the playoffs, who's going to the show. We're going to try and let you know right here to make sure that we do a pretty damn good job with it. We brought in Adam Hulse at Adam Hulse Sports, NFL writer for Sportskeeda. Seattle, the last team in the NFC West, and this will bring us to 500 for the rest of the NFL.
Yeah, you know, this NFC West series has definitely been interesting. I think we've had probably more discrepancies in this division than any of the other previous divisions that we've covered. If you go back and listen to the other three teams leading up to Seattle, when you look at the Rams, when you look at the 49ers, we're pretty different on the way things are going to turn out, and that could be very important for Seattle's chances of possibly winning this division.
Yeah, it's plus or minus 2 games, but when you talk about the playoffs,
big deal in the NFL.
Is a huge deal. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you on that. Regardless of what you have the record at, plus or minus 2 is big. The NFC West has one of the bigger challenges in the fact that they have to play the NFC East and they have to play the AFC North, not to mention each other throughout all this. It's not going to be easy for any of these teams to get wherever they end up. Seattle is the next team on the list. They have the Rams first. The Rams, not great last year. Cup, healthy Stafford, we'll find out. And McVay might be able to pull off some wins, but we agreed in week 1 it's not going to happen in Seattle. Seattle gets the win against the Rams. Then they go to Detroit. This is a fun one. Week 2, we're going to kind of see if we get that Geno regression you've been talking about, because Detroit is one of those teams that's going to be real fun to watch this year.
Yeah, I mean, Detroit feels like everybody's second favorite team, right? I've said that a few times. Everybody loves Detroit this year because everybody loved Detroit last year. Everyone was rooting for them to make the playoffs last year. Now, all of a sudden, they find themselves in a spot where they're favored to win that NFC North division, which is pretty interesting with what's going on in Detroit right now. But I'm actually going to pick a mini upset here, and I think that Seattle is going to go to Detroit and they're going to win the game.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually an upset. I think people are expecting Seattle to win this game. I was actually going to say the same thing, that my pick was an upset. I actually had Detroit winning in Detroit. It's not because of all the hype or anything like that. I think that Seattle is, everybody's still warming up, right, in the first couple of weeks. And honestly, the first couple of weeks, we talk from a fantasy perspective even, are the hardest ones to figure out because teams are still trying to get physically up. All the starters usually don't play in the preseason. They might get a half a game or a full game total throughout the entire preseason. So you see lag, you see fog, you see people still trying to ramp up. And when we talked about the possibility of Geno's regression, how much regression in Detroit, I will give Detroit this win only because it's in Detroit. So that's where I'm going with it. So it's interesting that both of us think this, a win or a loss for either team, is kind of an upset.
Yeah, I mean, I think Detroit is going to be the slight favorite at home, probably one of those 3-point home favorite type of situations. I call it a mini upset because it's a road game for Seattle, for one. And for two, in my opinion, the hype train with Detroit is getting a little bit out of control. You know, like I don't think they're as good as some people are hyping them up to be, though I do fully expect them to be in the mix for a playoff spot.
Yeah, you'll notice I don't necessarily say I think they're going to be great. I think they're going to be fun. And that's what I give Detroit. I think Detroit's going to be fun. Week 3, Carolina comes to Seattle. We've already given Seattle the win. Carolina, a lot of new faces there with the coaching staff, of course, with the number 1 pick, receivers and running backs, a lot of people changing out. Week 3, still figuring it out. Seattle, we've said this before, I've said it before, not a great team to have to figure things out against. Carolina goes to Seattle. Seattle already a hard place to play. We give Seattle the win.
Yeah, but I just think Seattle's the better team, especially, you know, facing off against a team with the head coaching change, with the rookie quarterback. There's a lot of reasons to like the Seahawks.
Week 4, they go to New York. They play the Giants. The Giants, one of those teams that we don't really know what we're going to have yet, with a lot of holdouts, especially Saquon Barkley. It's in New York. Seattle, you know, definitely warmed up at this point. I like to give home teams the win in these games that are real close and you're not really sure how it's going to play out. I'm actually going to give Seattle the win in New York, though. This is a West Coast team traveling east, and so you've got that discrepancy as well. I do think Saquon could make the difference, but I'm going to give Seattle the win in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about, you know, these teams traveling all the way across the country, the West Coast teams playing on the East Coast and vice versa. But in particular, yeah, it's that that West Coast coming east and that 3-hour time difference, that it's 3 hours earlier on your internal clock. I think that's a big factor. That's something that, like, you know, does mean a lot to me when I pick these kinds of games. So because the game's in New York, I'm taking the Giants for that reason.
We do this all live. We don't sit there and study like all the game times and stuff like that. I think it'll be a difference. Is this going to be a 1 p.m. game or a 4 p.m. game? Is this going to be a night game with the flex scheduling? I don't know. It might even be scheduled for a Monday night game. We haven't looked at that. We're not doing that. We're just looking at all these games live, 1-to-1 as they come up. By week 4, Seattle in week 5. Week 6, we've talked about the AFC North already. I give Seattle the loss at Cincinnati. You actually gave Seattle the win at Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those, again, with Cincinnati, I picked them to have a awesome record this year, not losing too many games at all, but they can't win all of them. This could be one of those kind of look-ahead type of games for Cincinnati. Also, with Seattle coming off that early bye weeks matter. That's why I picked the Seahawks.
There you go. Go back, check out that Cincinnati show if you haven't heard it. You might be surprised at the record that Cincinnati is going to end up with, according to myself and the Adam Hulse. Arizona, we're not going to go into it. Arizona, dumpster fire this season, not enough for Seattle. We give Seattle the win. Cleveland, you're very up on Cleveland, but not up enough to give them the win in Seattle. So both of us give Seattle the win there. At Baltimore, Seattle travels again west to east. I gave Seattle the win. I think their defense will be really kicking at that point. I really like Seattle's defense with the addition of Witherspoon back there with Woolen and Diggs. I think it's going to be too much for Baltimore in week 9. You, however, thought Baltimore was going to win because they will be at home.
Yeah, it's another one of those locational type of situations. If the game was in Seattle, I'd definitely be taking Seattle. I'm not super high on Baltimore, but when they get the West Coast team at home, I think that's a game they can win.
Washington comes to Seattle next. Again, we talk about how hard it is to play in Seattle already, and Washington, not a fantastic team on paper right now. I already brought up that Seattle defense. We don't even need to talk about the Seattle offense. Even with Geno's regression, they're going to have at least one of probably the top 2 receiving cores in the NFL. Is that fair to say for Seattle?
I mean, when you look at the full trio, yeah, sure.
On the ground, I like that combination as well. I think Seattle's just, kind of really stacked this year. In week 10, Washington comes in and they take a loss.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters where this game is played, whether it's a home game, road game. I just think Seattle is so much better than Washington at wherever it's played. Even if it was a travel all the way across the country and play on the East Coast. I don't like those West Coast teams on the East Coast, but this is the kind of situation that I still would have picked Seattle regardless of where it's played.
Absolutely would have as well. They go to the Rams in week 11, and we both actually gave Seattle the loss. We pull the upset here. The Rams have Cup. They've got Stafford, assuming he's healthy. They've got McVay, and this being a divisional game, we went ahead and gave Seattle a loss in LA.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Rams are good enough to get a split with a team like Seattle. I'm a little bit higher on the Rams this year than you are. If you go back and listen to that Rams episode, I have them a little bit competing with some of these types of teams, and I have them winning this one.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. You do. We talked about that ±2, and this is the Rams are one of those teams that comes into play. Week 12, San Francisco comes to Seattle because of the questions at quarterback, and even with Geno's regression, I think San Francisco probably has a better defense. That said, I think Seattle has a really great defensive backfield. Again, I hate to say one of the best in the NFL. We are doing this live, so I'm kind of going off the top of my head, but I think Seattle's defensive backfield is going to be kind of dangerous, especially by the time we get to week 12.
Yeah, definitely could be. I mean, Seattle, San Fran are the 2 teams I think that we both agree are going to be the 2 truly competing for the division title this year. And that's why I think we both kind of see this as a home split type of series.
Kind of like San Francisco had to do starting in week 12, ironically enough. San Francisco goes Seattle, Philly, Seattle. Seattle is going San Francisco, Dallas, San Francisco. So, and then they'll have Philly after that as we go through these games one by one. This is going to be a tough stretch. We talked about teams getting tested at the end of the season. 12 through 15 is going to be Seattle's test. We already gave them the win at San Francisco. Then they go to Dallas. I think I said this. If that game had been in Dallas, well, here it is. This game is in Dallas, and I give Dallas the win.
Yeah, I mean, Dallas at home. I think Dallas is going to take care of business. I do like the Seahawks. If the game was in Seattle, it'd be a little bit of a tougher pick for me to make. but in Dallas, I'm definitely going Cowboys.
At San Francisco, we already gave Seattle the loss. We basically gave home splits for the San Francisco-Seattle series. I'm still okay with that, even though it's only an episode old. I don't have any regrets here.
No, home split sounds about right for these two teams.
Will we do the same thing with the home team with Philly? Philly still should have a fantastic team this year. As good as last year, that remains to be seen. We'll talk more about that in the Philly episode. Seattle is a hard place to play. Seattle is going to need to show up at the end of the season. Just took 2 losses against Dallas and San Francisco. Now Philly comes to Seattle. Can they pull it together and beat Philly in Seattle?
Well, it seems like we're each picking Philly to win a lot of games this year. We haven't done an NFC East episode yet, but it kind of feels like whenever Philly comes up, Philly keeps getting the wins. They can't win them all. The kind of game that they could definitely lose in is having to go all the way to Seattle to go play at their place. I'm picking the Seahawks in a mini upset.
Seattle's going to need these games because the 4 previous from 11, 12, 13, and 14, we both have them losing 3 of 4. So Seattle's going to have to pull it together to finish out the end of the year. In Seattle, it is the home thing. This is going to be a great game. I bet this gets flexed to a night game if it's not already there. I'm going to give Seattle the win at home, 12th man against Philadelphia.
Yeah, it could be a playoff preview type of game. If they meet in the playoffs, there's probably a better chance it's in Philly than in Seattle. But at Seattle, I think the Seahawks can take care of business.
At Tennessee in week 16, coming off a big win against Philly, knowing that they need to get some wins to stay in contention. They go to Tennessee. I definitely think they have enough to beat Tennessee regardless of where Tennessee's at. We both have given Seattle the win at Tennessee. Pittsburgh comes to Seattle, and we both gave Seattle the win against Pittsburgh. I'm a little surprised at myself here, but it's in Seattle, so it's that home game advantage. It's that 12th man. Pittsburgh, I have them playing for something, but I also have Seattle playing for something. And if I'm being fair, if everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, teams are coming to fruition, meeting expectations of what they're supposed to be, I still think Seattle is a better team in week 17, and I guess I'm okay giving Seattle the win against Pittsburgh at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those games, again, that if the game was in Pittsburgh, maybe we would have went a different way. I do agree with you that when you look at both rosters, top to bottom, Seattle is the better team overall than Pittsburgh. So the better team playing at home late in the season where you kind of have things all worked out, it just makes sense for Seattle to win this.
And so here it is. We talked about the +2, the -2 as we've gone through this. And yet here, because in week 18, we give Seattle the win against Arizona. Won't get into that too much. And final records, I have Seattle at 12-5. You have Seattle at 12-5. Really only 2 disagreements, 3 disagreements, but we both get to 12-5 at the end of it all.
We probably are both, I guess, a little bit higher on Seattle than most people are. And, if you go back and listen to the 49ers episode with the 49ers being probably the favorite to win this division, 12-5 for Seattle. They're a real player.
Yeah, if you go back and listen to the 49ers episode, you'll see why this record of 12-5 is very impactful. This is going to have a lot of play if it comes out the way we wanted. But look, we keep talking about the schedules. I brought it at the beginning of the show. You're going to hear it through every episode. The schedules that these teams get lined up with are going to make a difference. And Seattle has teams like Carolina, the Giants, Arizona, Washington, Tennessee, the Rams even. They've got a lot of winnable games. And so to see Seattle with a winning record and a fairly high one, I don't think that's really too far out of expectation.
I can't emphasize enough how important the actual schedule is. Because it's one thing to just think about a team and say, oh, how many games is Seattle going to win this year? Oh, maybe 10, 11 if they're lucky. When you just think of a team and their wins, but going game by game like we've been doing is completely different than by just looking at their roster and thinking about, this looks like a 10-win team. Who you play matters, when you play those teams matter, and where you play those teams. It's not just who you're facing, but when and where as well.
And so we have Seattle hitting pretty favorable in those places. And look, they're going to have a fantastic receiving core, even with some Geno regression. I love their defensive backfield right now. The running game is set to support the passing game. The defensive backfield is set to support the guys up front. And don't forget, Seattle added Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner's no spring chicken, but he's definitely an elite player that's going to have influence for Seattle this year.
I mean, he's getting older. He was still a second-team All-Pro last year, so, he's still playing damn well even later in his career. And he's not super old. He's still in his very low 30s. This is still Pete Carroll. And you mentioned, they have a running game that can support the passing game. Because it's Pete Carroll, I actually flip that around. In despite how good their receivers are, I still think it's going to be the running game with Walker and Charbonnet that they're going to lean on. And then they have these excellent receivers to support the rushing game, not the other way around for me.
And that's why we end up at 12-5, both of us. Again, different ways, different reasons, same result. NFC West, we're all the way through it. We are halfway through the NFL. Go back, check out the other episodes, see where we are sitting. We've already got half the playoff picture set, but if you want to know what it looks like, you're going to have to go check it out. Are we right? Probably, because we got Adam Hulse from Adam Hulse Sports here, NFL writer with Sportskeeda at Adam Hulse Sports on Twitter. If you want to hear all the episodes, and you do, go over to YouTube, That Effin' Sports Show, EFIN, or wherever you get your podcasts. All you got to do is put EFIN and we'll pop up, and you can listen to every single one. The NFC East next. We talked about a lot of those games in this one. The NFC East is going to be another fun division to run through, especially with Adam Hulse, who happens to be a Cowboys fan. Yuck. Come back and join us. We'll see how it all plays out on That Effin' Sports Show. Everybody take care. We'll see you next time.